Welcome to the Old School Food Freedom Podcast, brought to you by your friends at Finding Balance. I'm your host, Chrissy Kirkman. On this show, we kick it as old school as it gets with how God created us to live, free from dieting, food rules, and body shame. Ready to replace the old soundtrack of cultural lies with biblical truth? Let's start with this. You don't have to be trapped by food struggles. You were created to be free. God adores you and wants you to experience the fullness of life without body hatred or bondage to dieting. The time is now to take a step toward the life you were created for. We're so glad you're here with us today. Let's get into today's episode. In John 10:10, God's word says, "The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full." And Psalm 31:4 reads, "Keep me free from the trap that is set before me, for you are my refuge." We ask a lot of our bodies when we show up underfed and underfueled. When we aren't showing up with a full tank to be present for other people, it's more difficult to be the hands and feet of Jesus and do what God created us to do for his kingdom. Our enemy, Satan, is the conspirator behind diet culture, a twisting of how God designed us to view food, health, and our bodies. He knows that an underfed believer is easy prey, and he takes advantage in countless ways. But don't be afraid. This story ends in a victory that has already been won by the blood of Jesus. Join Leslie Schilling and I today as we share God's truth to help you stay nourished and free from the trap. Hey, Leslie Schilling, thank you so much for being on the show. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I am thrilled to have you. I've been listening to so many episodes that you've been on of other podcasts that it is about time that you are on Old School Food Freedom. So friends, let's just get this going. This is Leslie Schilling. She owns a Las Vegas-based private practice specializing in nutrition counseling for families, people with disordered eating concerns, professional athletes, performers, and military personnel. Leslie has served as a performance nutrition consultant for Cirque du Soleil and the NBA and an expert contributor to U.S. News and World Report. Her latest book, Feed Yourself, about how diet culture shows up in our safest places, is available anywhere books are sold. You can also find a link in our show notes. Okay, Leslie, we love to get into this and kick off our show with a question of what old school item or experience do you miss from back in the day?
You're going to laugh. Seeing my daughter grow up in this world and this time makes me miss a landline. I miss a time when smartphones were not a thing or connectivity was not a thing, and we had more connection with other people, less connectivity to the world. So I miss the time of landlines and less technological connection. Although it's wonderful, it does take away from kind of, relationships. And you really have to work a lot harder in this day and age for that. So that's something I miss, just like, oh, I wish it was easier for her growing up to just run and play in the neighborhood and not think about getting on Minecraft or whatever.
Right.
The other thing I miss is so par for the course as a dietitian, a foodie, is a food. Do you remember the little snack chips Bugles?
Oh, yeah, they still have them. My husband loves them.
They were the thing growing up, and they were super easy to find. I got them for my daughter, a couple years ago. But I miss, we would put them all on our fingers and go do, 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 and then eat them.
So we used them as nails, and we would be
you put them on as nails, and then you play a little trumpet, and then you eat them. But anyway, there's all those fun foods that we miss.
Munchos. I really miss Munchos and Tater Skins. Do you remember Tater Skins?
Tater Skins, yeah.
Tater Skins got baked potato appeal because they're made with potato skins that are real. I know every jingle.
Great.
I don't know why.
Well done.
Thank you. Why? I don't know. This is how my mind works. Well, I loved those. Actually, I would say over 5 seasons, the first one you shared about missing a landline is probably the one I hear the most, which is crazy.
Yeah.
But it's so true because you actually could disconnect and actually plug into real connection, true connection that matters, that those experiences, the memories that we can go back to of good times, days gone by. Oh my gosh. Yeah, there's really something to be said.
Yeah, just think about hanging with my neighbor friends, but not like, hey, can I friend this person on Minecraft so we can build this world together? I'm like, what? That's so fun, but what? Like, go play it.
Yeah, it's not real. It's fake. That could be a whole episode of its own.
Yes. There's the screens and technology. Yeah, it's different.
Yeah.
Yeah, pros and cons.
Finding the balance between them all.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, today we're going there. We are talking about an unfed believer is easy prey, an easy target. There has been a trap laid, set before us by the enemy who is pretty much in charge of diet culture. And we're going to talk about it because I heard you say on another podcast, an unfed believer is easy prey, and it's in your book. And so I really love your story. So can you just share a little bit about that with us so everyone can have that same perspective?
Yeah, so I grew up in North Carolina. That's where my draw is from, in case you're curious.
Yeah, where in North Carolina? Because I love it.
Just outside of Charlotte, North Carolina.
Okay.
So, and I went to school at Appalachian State for my undergrad and master's, and then I moved to Tennessee. So I was in Tennessee for 15 years. And so people who know me professionally, like, met me probably when I lived in Tennessee. And so growing up, I was a competitive gymnast, I was a runner, I was a sprinter, and went to school. I've started pre-med because I wanted to be Clarice from Silence of the Lambs. But anyway,
oh my gosh,
I wanted
awesome.
to work in the FBI. I wanted to do forensics. And that was the path to get there. It was CSI before it was cool, you know.
Yeah.
And then I realized that when I had to take botany, that I was like, maybe I don't want to take botany at the moment because I'd already taken all these other electives and stuff. I had a really wonderful advisor, Dr. Diane Butterworth. I remember her and all her Butterworth bottles in her office. She was like, Leslie, why don't you take nutrition this semester and just see if you like it? It will count either way, whatever you do. And I did. And I didn't even know it was a thing. I didn't know you could major in it. It was just completely a new thing to me. And having been an athlete, having always been kind of interested in food and very fortunate to have always liked food, it just seemed like a no-brainer. So I took the class, really enjoyed it, and it really caused me to pivot and change my major more to nutritional sciences. And having been an athlete in my master's, I incorporated exercise science as well and started out in a research position in Memphis, Tennessee. I got married and moved to Memphis and just thought I was going to be the research dietitian nerd who did sports nutrition. You know, baby dietitian, was very naive. And then I was not going to do eating disorders. I didn't understand that. No, I was just not my bag. And then...
So you didn't have that struggle?
You know, in college, that's a whole different story. I really didn't have a lot of disordered eating practices until I learned them in my program in college.
Wow.
So that's a whole nother story.
Okay.
So I learned some unfortunate disordered patterns in college and engaged in overexercise and things like that. But luckily was able to not have any of those stick too long, but just didn't have the understanding. Now, eating disorders were all around me. They were in my family. They were in my friends. I just was really quite oblivious to it growing up. And then once I started my own career, and I worked with this wonderful therapist who sent a client to me because I was a sports dietitian. And she said, Leslie, I really want you to help this athlete who has an eating disorder. I'm like, yeah, I don't do that. And her mom called me and her mom was like, listen, my daughter is an athlete and I really think the sports nutrition thing is what's going to help her heal. And you go to my church. So she guilted me.
Oh, gosh.
She guilted me and it worked. And I was really naive and I called the therapist who became one of my longtime mentors. And she was like, listen, order these 3 books and I will guide you step by step. We need you. And this mom is right. Her connection to her sport and her motivation for her sport is probably going to save her or get her at least to be motivated to feed herself more and better and consistently. And so, you know, I was very weight-centrically trained as a dietitian, as evidenced by the disordered eating things I picked up in college, and had to unlearn all of that. You know, I was a calorie counting. It's not a diet. It really is a dietitian for an early part of my career. And I really attribute kind of shifting to a more weight inclusive anti-diet approach by having professionals that really just took me under their wing and schooled me, for lack of a better term. And they were all therapists who were all very well-versed in intuitive eating and eating disorders. And I just got really fortunate early in my career to make that pivot and to be challenged by professionals who really loved and supported me. And it's amazing the people who land in front of us in our careers. And these therapists were, and some other dietitians too, were really, really a big part of me kind of being the dietitian I am today and working at this intersection of eating disorder prevention, sports nutrition, and just general anti-diet culture.
It's so good. Hey, we have another giveaway for you. Leslie is so generous to have donated a copy of her book, Feed Yourself, Step Away from the Lies of Diet Culture and Into Your Divine Design. So for a chance to win, all you have to do is head to our show notes, click our giveaway link, and enter your details. Okay, back to it. I heard you mention in another podcast that you were talking about the Way Down Diet, the Way Down Workshop. And can you share a little bit of that? Because that was in my history. And we talked a little bit about like, man, how could we not see it? But we didn't see it back then. So share a little bit about what that is.
Well, and I'm, again, baby dietitian working in a research setting at the moment at University of Memphis, which is where the author of The Way Down went through for nutrition. And so it was really intriguing to me. And at that point, I was like, oh, dietitian author, amazing. And it's also like, at that point, you're like, okay, a dietitian wrote it. It's got to be amazing. We do the same things when we're like, ooh, a pastor or ministry leader wrote it. It's got to be amazing. But unfortunately, with this, we learned that like when you wrap something in a Bible verse, it doesn't make it truth.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things out of context. And so I did find that early in my career. And my mentor, boss at the time, knew the author of that and just provided some insight to me that kind of opened my eyes to like, wow, okay, maybe this isn't the way. But at first I was just starstruck by, a dietitian who was Christian, and we learn and we grow and we unlearn and we relearn. And so I think so many people have fallen into those things very innocently, right? When you've like a person of authority and then authority wrapped in the ultimate authority, it's hard to deny it.
So we can see now that diet culture was really interwoven in the Way Down programs.
Yeah.
We talk a lot about diet culture on this show, but I love how you describe what diet culture is. Will you just describe it for us, just in case anyone hasn't heard it?
Yeah. It can be a lot of things, but it's a system of beliefs that overvalues thinness and weight loss as a means to health. But it also devalues certain types of bodies, certain types of foods, people who don't look the part. It creates a false hierarchy of bodies that are good and bodies are bad. Same with food. And it's in all our safe places. So diet culture is the obligatory weight check when you walk into the doctor's office. It is the good, bad food health lesson that your third grader has to do. It's in the fluency homework when we're shaming larger bodies and elevating thinner bodies. It is everywhere. It's in the lunch that you're, having with a friend where you really want to order a burger and you make yourself order the salad. So diet culture is really everywhere, but it's a system of beliefs that makes us think that thinness is the way to health, love, and righteousness. And really nothing could be further from the truth.
Okay, can we just soak that in? Can we really listen from a biblical aspect? What you just said is profound because we have been raised in a culture that values diet, that values a certain look, a certain weight, all these things. Can you repeat what you just said, though? Because I just think that if we look at this through a spiritual lens, it changes everything about what you said.
Yeah, it's like we equate thinness with health, love, and righteousness. And diet culture makes us think achieving it at any cost is okay. And it really flips over into idol worship too.
Yeah.
It's really dangerous, and it's dangerous that we don't see it. But think back to what we were talking about with the weight down is like when you put authority on something, your doctor, your dietitian, your therapist, your preacher, and then you wrap it with ultimate authority, that is really, really dangerous because we're taking ultimate authority out of context. Because if we're all created in the image of God, thinness is not required of us because look across the bodies of the world, they're not all thin. So we could really dig into that. But like body diversity is divine and diet culture denies that.
And diet culture is sinister. It's evil at its core. It's an assault on the very image of God. It is filled with shame. It tells us we're never good enough. We're not good enough for people. We're not good enough for ourselves. Definitely not good enough for God. And it makes us feel terrible about who we are. We don't feel worthy of anyone's love, of acceptance, of taking up any space. We don't feel like we're fit for the service of God. I have wasted so much of my life that I've worked through now, and we're good to go now. But there is so much of my life that I spent giving myself when I could have been giving myself to service to God. I was like tiptoeing in that, but the rest of me was trying so hard to slim down for Jesus. Like, no, that's not even what he was calling me to.
Yeah. And I love that you said that because, I mean, like, I'm sitting here thinking, like, if you're a client across from me in my office, my hand is on my heart and I'm thinking, I am so sorry that you learned somewhere in what should have been a safe place that your body size was tied to your worthiness in some way.
Yeah.
I am so sorry that whatever theological learnings were there were so misguided to make you think that that was true. So, and I just want to say, I'm sorry because so many people have felt that. They've learned it in their churches when, say, spiritual leaders, ministry leaders, Bible study leaders, are talking about our worthiness in relation to the weight loss program that we're doing together.
Yeah.
We learned this in safe places, but it is not God's truth.
Right. It's a spiritual battle, and it runs unchecked in our churches, in our culture. But really in our churches, I mean, we expect it in the world. We don't expect it in the church, but the church body is made up of people who are living in the world.
Absolutely.
We are trying to be better. And so once we know better, we can do better. It's still a choice. And I want to just say, I was thinking about this last night when I was falling asleep and thinking about having this interview with you. I remember there are times where I will get just furious at some of the things I'm hearing, either that I've experienced at the doctor's office or I've experienced within churches, or thinking back to the cringy things that I've done and said at church with regard to food, weight loss, whatever.
Same.
And then that fury turns into just heartbreak. Like you were just like, put my hand on my heart and like, I'm so sorry. It makes me sad. Like there was so much of my life that I didn't know what I now know. I want to have grace. I want my heart posture to change, to be tender-hearted and loving and caring and understanding. Like I was there too. I didn't know. I was so blind. Like now I'm just like, how can we not see this? How did we live so many years not seeing the truth, what the enemy's doing to us, yet we didn't see it. And then once you see it, you can't unsee it. And so really having that, just a tender heart toward people, toward my doctor, who we've talked about this on a different episode on the show before, but like the time is now to start rescheduling those follow-up appointments so I can get renewals on my medication. But I don't want to go back to her because the last time was so traumatizing. It was horrible. Yet it's like I almost feel like to run to someone new and have to start all over again versus educate her a little bit more. I feel like I keep trying to do that. Is that really my mission or is it just easier? I don't know.
So it's like, is it worth it? And, I think about that too. And like, not every battle is ours to fight, but there are times when you've been brought to harm, someone you love's been brought to harm. In my case, one of my clients has been brought to harm. where I feel like it's my obligation to be the advocate for this person. So I'm going to write a letter. I'm going to call. I'm going to do these things. I've had quite a few run-ins with some medical professionals from just my own stuff, but also standing up and being assertive, communicate, like, I'm going to decline the weight check. And they'll be like, well, you can't. I'm like, well, actually I can. And I do not give my consent.
Yeah.
How are you with those words? And it's hard. Like, I do this for a living.
Yeah.
And this is hard because that goes back to this unspoken power dynamic of how we put people in our culture on pedestals and make them ultimate authority when your doctor is not the ultimate authority of your life. You are the ultimate authority of this physical body and how you treat it. And so I think sometimes we forget that, but I want to take that back and have compassion for this provider too and say, I was weight-centrically trained. I would have given you a lecture as a baby dietitian about something ridiculous, I don't know, that I learned and thought that I could just spew it and you'd run off and be fine. Listen, I did not learn great counseling skills. I had to pay for that post-graduate work. But those are things that, we have to decide if we're going to fight those battles. Some people don't have the option to leave a healthcare provider, say because of insurance or financial reasons or geographical reasons or whatever. And so that would be something that we would have to have a conversation about. But it's really, really hard. And I will say, if you're a listener and you have a similar situation, write your things down on paper. Write down a Post-it note. Like last time we had a really uncomfortable encounter about weight. I do not want to speak about weight. I do not give my consent to speak about weight. My issues today are. We are way more assertive when we write it down than when we walk into an unspoken power dynamic. And so, you pick your battles, and sometimes you can just leave and pick somebody new. And then sometimes we have to understand that this person has been weight-centrically trained and they just haven't seen the other options yet for care.
Yeah, it's being prepared. And just like the whole topic of today of an underfed believer is easy prey, you've got to be prepared. You've got to feed yourself. And we'll talk about that. I want to say, if you do have an upcoming appointment and you're nervous about this, Finding Balance has these free downloads, disordered eating printables, where you can request, just have an open discussion, print it out, hand this little note card to the nurse or the doctor that asks not to be weighed. You can even, we have the pediatric weight discussions. Please don't discuss weight in front of my child. And then we have a scale and worth reminder that you could print out and say, hey, you might want to stick this above your scale that says, your worth is that this number kind of thing. So feel free to go to findingbalance.com and find those free downloads.
And those are all great ways to be assertive without having to open your mouth.
Yes.
So when some of us, get paralyzed by that power dynamic, I think those are really great options to have. I've seen those. And then sometimes I don't have the time to go print anything. I will just Post-it note, do not speak about weight or BMI or growth charts in front of my child. This is my number if you need to talk about it.
Perfect.
So I'll mama bear it though, because that's kind of what I'm used to. But for her, right, we do that for our kids. But we have to really do that for ourselves sometimes too. And having those printables are really, really useful, because then if you come in and you want to skip the weight check, which is well within your rights, unless you're on a medication that's legitimately prescribed based on weight, then that's something that's well within your right to do.
Yeah, so good. So I want to read John 10:10 that says, the thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. So when we hear this, what is stolen from us? When we are involved in diet culture, when we are dieting, when dieting is weakening our spiritual strength, our security, it's threatening us. It's robbing us of trust. This is the struggle that we're in. And by not nourishing ourselves, it can lead to death in a variety of ways. Some are very obvious and just complete malnourishment. I'm not the expert. This is just overview. So if I'm ever wrong, Leslie, please let me know. But
you're good. You're good.
Then other ways, if we're not giving our bodies proper fuel and nutrients that we need, then it can lead to our bodies struggling in certain areas because of years of dieting and years of being underfed and undernourished. So let's do this. Leslie, will you just share with us some of the ways, like what happens in our bodies, to our bodies when we are underfed and undernourished? Like I want everyone to understand what it means that an underfed believer is easy prey. What does it look like?
So I think one of the best examples I can just use from like decades of sitting across from clients telling me that they're in a fog.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like when you are underfed, you're not firing completely cognitively. And I've had people who are like, I feel fine. And I'm like, okay, I hear that a lot, but let's get you fed. And then you can look back and be like, wow, I had no idea that I was just moving through my life in this fog, cognitive fog, physical fog. When you were not feeding yourself consistently and adequately, you lose presence with other people.
Mm-hmm.
When you lose the presence with other people, you don't stand up for things like yourself. You give up things that you really would like to do. You opt not to do them. You might be embarrassed for some reason or other, or maybe you don't want to eat out with someone. You lose relationships. You might be in them, but are you there? You lose mental health. You have increased risk of anxiety and depression when you're underfed. So there are very real risk to being underfed. And I'm just going to say most everybody that I've ever worked with in my 20 plus year career have been underfed when they think they're eating too much or enough. So from a mental health perspective, if you're always worried about food or you're always thinking about food, you're probably not eating enough. So there's one sign. So like if it's like takes up so much time and attention, it probably means you're not eating enough.
Can I pause you right there? Oh my gosh. So when you said that, one of the things that has been so profound to me in recovery is that when I am sitting in a Sunday morning sermon, I now can sit, I mean, typically they're around 30 minutes or so. And I can sit there for the 20 or 30 minutes that our pastor, who's my dad, is talking, and I can actually absorb and listen and make notes and read the scriptures that he's reading and process them, that I am present in that moment. And I'm like, wow, like there will just be times where I'll think, wow, I'm not wondering where we're going to lunch after this, because I'm not kidding. Almost every Sunday, every sermon, I'm the worship leader. So I'd be worshiping for the first half of the, and then I come down and sit and listen. But by then, like I've got my mind so wrapped up in what are we going to eat, because I would never eat on Sunday mornings. And I still struggle to eat on Sunday mornings, mainly because of singing, because something I could eat could give me indigestion and then it's going to be a struggle. So it's just better to not eat until lunch. Well, then I'm ravenous, and so I'm just seeing in this moment how underfed I was every single Sunday morning, to the point of I can't even get fed the word of God, that why I'm here. Like I could worship him, but then I sit down and I can't get that nourishment to my soul. And now I can. So there's one way.
Yeah. And you just hit the nail on the head. If you aren't physically fed, you can't be spiritually fed. Because you're not there. You're not cognitively there.
No.
You're just not cognitively there. And I just want to go back to you as the worship director. Can you imagine like your stomach growling when you're mic'd up?
Yeah, but can you imagine eating something that's giving you indigestion and you're like, Savior, he can move the, like, right? Like that's always been my fear.
So I used to do the sports nutrition for Cirque du Soleil, and you've got people like flying upside down on a harness. And I'm like, we're not going to have a bean burrito before you fly over the audience, So I mean, that's that nutrition strategy of like, hey, I have to have something. And what is pretty non-eventful for me to eat? And that's trial and error, but like finding something that can keep you present so you can worship at the level you feel like that requires of you, that feels like worship, that you can bring people along with you, but that requires physical nourishment to absorb spiritual nourishment.
Love that.
Yeah. And so those are all mental health.
Yes. Yeah.
Now,
okay.
We can pivot to physical health.
Yes.
Some of the most common symptoms of being underfed and underfueled is like, I'm cold all the time. I get that. Like people are like, I'm cold all the time. I'm like, I wonder if you're underfed, because people who are fed adequately and consistently are not cold all the time unless there's some other type of disorder. And so does my thermoregulation work? So there's that. Am I cold all the time? Some people lose their hunger cues and they'll just say, well, I'm just not hungry. That is a survival mechanism because the body doesn't know the difference between diet restriction and famine. So that's something is like a lack of cues. That can also come from lots of other things, stress, anxiety, medications. So that's not just that. Hormone issues. And there's, don't go looking for all these hormone balancing things on the socials because most of that is bogus. So, but like hormone balancing, that's not what we're doing. What we want to do is have enough ingredients in our body to make our hormones. So if you have irregular or missing periods, that is a flag for sure. You're losing bone mineralization if you're in the younger years, if you're like late teens. So, and even early 20s, like we're losing bone density. Here's what lands a lot of people in my office. I have so many GI symptoms. I'm bloated. I have constipation. I can't eat things. I've taken all these things out. 90% of the people in my office, we fix that by eating enough. Your gut doesn't feel really good when it doesn't have enough ingredients to make enzymes and doesn't have enough food in it to move things through it. So GI symptoms are a big one. And then poor performance, like if you're moving your body or at work, like I don't feel like I'm, like we said before, cognitively there or as fast or as quick, but also physically. Like I'm not moving in a way where I can like keep up with my coworkers or keep up with my kids or change classes and it not impact me as like it feels like a negative energy drain. So those are just a few of the things. Iron deficiency is one we see quite frequently. So there are a lot of signs and symptoms that unfortunately in our culture, you're more likely to get a pat on the back for the dieting behaviors, or somebody's going to say you have good willpower or all the things, instead of saying, gosh, I'm really worried about you. You know, it's 95 degrees outside and you're wearing a tank top, a long sleeve shirt, and a sweatshirt. I'm really worried about you. We're more likely in diet culture for somebody to be like wishing that they could do the same thing too, which is, that's diet culture for you. Yeah. Wishing that you had a disorder that somebody else had.
And that's sad. I've been that person. Yeah. And Lord, forgive me for that. And I can even look back and know specific moments in time where I made comments like that to someone that, knowing what I know now, and now know that they had a full-blown eating disorder. And so what was I saying? How did they receive that? We've had at least one person we've had a follow-up, and I really apologize because I didn't know.
And when we know better, we do better, like you said. Like I was a dietitian that probably recommended and congratulated people on disordered behaviors, okay? A health professional. So we have all done it. And that's because my training, like I paid thousands and thousands of dollars for a weight-centric diploma that I then had to pay thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to unlearn and relearn. So we're all here swimming in this really unsafe diet culture lake or ocean. Yeah, right. And we're all here. And so just like, but when we see it, we can start to think about like, oh, maybe I shouldn't comment on that person's body. Maybe if I notice someone that's losing weight, maybe I should ask them if they're okay instead of congratulating them on weight loss. Maybe I could just not comment on bodies at all and say, hey, I really have been thinking about you. How are you doing? And that's something that's really hard because if you grew up in the South like I did, body comments are the first thing you hear when you walk in the church door. So,
either way.
Or school, or work, or wherever.
Every spectrum, no matter what it is. Yeah.
It's true. We've been programmed to, and that's diet culture because it's that aesthetic piece of putting someone's look above who they are as a person. And so if we can kind of backtrack that, the people around us can see it and hopefully join in.
Yeah. How do we shift our hearts to be less superficial and like go deeper, look within? And something else I was thinking is, the bottom line is our bodies must have food. God designed them to have food. They're designed to stay nourished no matter what size you are.
Right.
And we don't believe this because diet culture has told us for years and years and years that those pesky cravings, you just need a shake for breakfast and a shake for lunch and a sensible dinner.
Dinner. I knew you were
remember. Like, I remember jingles and I remember the lies that I was fed in commercials growing up, and I'm trying to unlearn those still. Hey, I want to take just a moment to thank those of you who are supporting us. Finding Balance is a donor-funded nonprofit ministry that operates month to month by the generosity of our friends, our staff, and our board of directors who are faithful, generous supporters. Our entire team loves to give to this ministry. If you've been blessed by the podcast or another Finding Balance resource or offering and would like to join our giving family by giving to our year-end fundraising campaign, head to findingbalance.com/donate. There, you can learn more about our initiatives that will enable us to help more women find Jesus in the middle of their struggles with food and body image. And you can give a gift that will help the ministry move into what God is doing next in 2025 and beyond and help keep this podcast going. I am so grateful for you, so grateful for your support and your listenership. Thank you so much for being here.
And it's hard. Like, you and I are around the same age, and we grew up in diet culture.
For sure.
Our parents grew up in diet culture. It's going to take a lot of really hard conversations and undoing, whether we feel it or not. And that's the thing. Like, I could have a bad body image day, but you know who's never going to hear about it? My daughter. So those are things that we can still suffer in this world, and we will, because diet culture is here, and this is where we live. We will still suffer. But I think if we can see it, that's one big thing that can be really helpful for us. And then we can act opposite, as one of my wonderful therapists used to tell me. We can act opposite when we are having a bad day. Like, I'm not feeling like the cover of a magazine today. I'm still going to be respectful of my body. I'm still going to feed my body. I'm still going to talk about my body positively if body conversation comes up at all in front of my child, in front of other people. So those are things like, you don't have to feel like you're ready for a cover shoot to make really positive change in your own heart and mind. You can be like, I feel the tug to restrict, or I feel the tug to over-exercise. And I know that that doesn't serve me. It doesn't mean that those thoughts will always go away and not pop back in your head, but it means that you can be like, I see you there, and I'm not going to act on you today. I'm going to maybe do the opposite, or I'm going to read a verse that helps sustain me, or I'm going to call a friend who always knows what to say or how to get my mind off things. Or I have a lot of clients just make a playlist that really takes them out of a funk.
Yes.
But yeah, I wish I could say that once we change our minds and once we see diet culture, that it all gets easier. Some things do, but sometimes it's harder to see the lies that surround you when other people don't. And you have to decide what you're going to do with that. And I know that I don't want it for my daughter. So I'm gonna do whatever I can. Bodies are different, and that's amazing. Yeah. Look at the amazing diversity God has made.
That's so good. And it takes me back to when you were talking about how an unfed woman or girl is quiet. She doesn't speak up for herself. She doesn't use her voice. And in another podcast, you said, we can't make waves in this world when we're hungry. We have to be fed to be the hands and feet of Jesus and to do what we were created to do. That is the key here, is to do the opposite. Like, if I'm just like, I wake up and I don't feel like eating, I don't want to make breakfast, I'm fine. I can just go to lunch. That's what is normal for me. But knowing that if I'm underfed and I'm trying to do finding balance work, I'm going to be sitting behind my laptop, typing, not wanting to engage with my team or other people, just because I'm underfed. I'm not
Yeah.
at peak performance. Even if I were fed and not at peak performance, it's still better than not being fed. I'm seeing it now, but I didn't see it then. And so to flip the script, to do the opposite is to be like, you know what? No, I'm actually going to advocate. I like to call it Christ-centered agency. I have Christ-centered agency over my life and my body. And you were talking about this world is hard. John 16:33 says, in this world, you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world. So Jesus, you see that I'm struggling to feed myself today. Will you just help me take the first bite of the first meal I need of the day? Help me remember how God the Father created my body, that it is good, that even at this size, it is still good, that it may not be what the world says it should be. Maybe I'm still wanting it to be a different size, and I am still in this capable body. By your strength, I can do the things that you are calling me to do. And I can do them so much better when I'm fed.
Yeah. And I love Christ-centered agency. I love it so much. And I hope that people really carry that around with them in their pocket as this part of themselves that is kind of like intercessory prayer, right?
Yes.
Which is my favorite. Like, people are like, do you pray with your clients and stuff like that? I'm like, listen, I pray for them all the time.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about them all the time. But the Christ-centered agency is something we can engage when we feel like, gosh, I don't feel like I have the strength to eat this peanut butter sandwich for my lunch. But you know what? Like, this Christ-centered agency can help me do that. I'm going to engage that. And here's another piece to think about is Jesus does not want us brought to harm. And restriction brings us to harm.
Ooh,
and it disconnects us from our neighbors and our loved ones. So we cannot be the hands and feet if we're underfed. And I love Christ-centered agency as a way to like engage that self-care. I tell my clients, I'm like, listen, I don't need you to like it. I need you to do it. Sometimes, we don't like everything that we have to do for self-care.
Yeah.
I'd like to watch another episode of this show instead of putting myself to bed. But guess what? I need to get up and brush my teeth and put myself in the bed. So like self-care isn't pedicures and massages. Self-care is making yourself an unsexy breakfast. Like, doesn't have to be like a Food Channel, spread. It just has to check all the boxes, meaning like, not coffee and not a granola bar, maybe the two of them together plus some other things.
Yeah.
So that's the thing is like thinking of that Christ-centered agency as what you engage to get the self-care done when you just aren't feeling it. And I just want to validate that sometimes we don't feel it. And this world's really hard. And diet culture is getting louder and louder and louder and more expansive in what should be very safe places. And so I just want to validate that it makes sense that you might have to engage that Christ-centered agency all day long sometimes.
All day long. Because I didn't even know what agency over my body meant. When I learned what it meant, that I can make the choices for myself. My doctor can tell me something, a pastor can tell me something, but it's ultimately my choice. So to say I have agency over my body, but I want Christ-centered agency. Where's Jesus coming into play here? What is he directing me to? And I'm going to listen to him. I'm going to ask him. Then I'm going to listen and just see what he has to say. And that has really changed things for me, for my life. And so let's talk about the overall takeaways of the fact that an unfed believer is easy prey for the enemy. What are some things you would want us to know that wraps up this episode, that we can walk away hearing this and feel, okay, I got some new knowledge. Here's some reasons I want to start feeding myself, having Christ-centered agency over my nutrition and feeding myself, because it sets me up for a different way of life.
Absolutely. The short and sweet of it is like, I don't know how many of your listeners are like pet people or plant people or both or whatever, but I'm like, treat yourself like your pet. Keep them fed and watered.
Oh.
So don't skip meals. And if that's hard to really think about, like a younger version of you that you love very much, a child, you are worthy of the same things. You're worthy of that type of love and attention and care. So that's kind of like, I don't do rules, but like, don't skip meals. And, there's so much buzz about intermittent fasting. Intermittent fasting looks a lot like binge eating disorder. And intermittent fasting in the studies demonstrate that it increases eating disorder symptomology. And if you look at it across all other diets, it's no different than anything else. People lose weight and gain it back. So really, exercise and futility. Eat regular, consistent meal. A meal is never, ever, ever a granola bar unless that's your only option. So if you like a granola bar, great. Say you want a granola bar at breakfast. And listen, this is all very generic because everybody is different. Some people need more. Some people need less. Some people have different schedules and they can break things up more. But like I would think if you really like granola bars, grab yourself a 2-pack granola bar, have a couple scrambled eggs, cup of coffee, cup of juice, whatever, rock on, make a breakfast sandwich. Just get the box checked. Do I want you to have a mindful, lovely food experience? Yes. But not every meal is a party in your mouth, and you just have to get fed sometimes.
Yeah.
And so pack yourself a really yummy lunch so between 2 and 4 o'clock, you can function,
Yeah.
But also pack a snack or plan on a snack between that 2 to 5 o'clock period for a lot of people. If you're a person that has a lunch, say, between 11 and 1, and you have dinner between 6 and 8, that's a really long time to go without food. And that really helps people stave off that kind of afternoon pre-dinner, like I'm going to kill a box of Triscuits because I'm so hungry, have an idea of things that you might want to have for dinner, and they can be easy. Don't be afraid of convenience foods. Let me tell you, I love the Kung Pao chicken from Trader Joe's. I buy an extra bag of peppers and rice. That's my backup meal. So that's something that we keep in the freezer in case we're I can't even, So those are all okay. So don't forget, I use bag salads because the girl's not going to shave a Brussels sprout. I'll eat one, but I'm not going to cut it like that. Don't be afraid to do those things. So do not skip your meals. Do not be afraid to have snacks. If your body is hungry, honor it. Figure out how to honor it. Try not to track. But if you're that person, try not to obsessively track. There aren't many people that I've encountered, including very high-level athletes, that track in a fashion that serves them well. Most people track, meaning MyFitnessPal, any type of apps like that. Also, per the literature, in males and females linked to eating disorder symptoms. So those are things that we really have to be careful because we think we're doing well, but those apps historically predict your needs way lower than they need to be. They promote weight loss instead of adequate eating. So we have to be really, really careful with apps. If you are a person who cannot even imagine stepping away from your tracking, that's really something to think about. You're not alone because we've been taught that that's something we need to do, but we don't. These very wise bodies know when we're hungry. They typically know when we're satisfied. A lot of things can interfere with that. So that's something you might want to, play with or see an eating disorder informed professional about. But yeah, try not to track. If you're a person that's really worried about all your rings and your steps and all the stuff like that, really check in. We can live without that stuff and live really well. And so think about whether that's serving you positively or negatively. And the litmus test is how would I feel if I didn't do this tomorrow? And if you're anxious, so nervous, what about this? What about this? That's a sign that maybe you should step away. Go to paper and pencil, but don't use numbers. Just use hey, I had breakfast and how did I feel? So we take the numbers out of it and really try to check in with yourself. Stay hydrated, like I said, fed and watered. Women generally, this is a very general recommendation, need about 2 liters of water a day. So that's just something to think about. And then prioritize sleep. That's something we don't think about. And if you were in my office, I'd be asking you about your schedule. Do you have time for yourself during the day? Are you working through lunch, just eating at your desk? I would ask you to step back if you could and take 20 minutes just to eat your meal and not be looking at your work. I would ask, where can you get some self-care time in during the day? And that might just be sitting on a bench outside your office, getting some sunshine and some deep breathing, where you're not dealing with people, if that's helpful. But really prioritize sleep. And I will say sleep, if you're having trouble sleeping, that is something that there is a lot of evidence and a lot of interventions that are available to help people sleep better. It's really crucial because if we're not sleeping well, we don't get to do a lot of these other things well. And it's really also hard to engage that Christ-centered agency when you're really, really tired and underfed.
Yes, this is so good. Thank you for this. Okay, you read a verse, 1 Kings 19:7. maybe I've read this verse. It never stood out to me. When you read it this morning, I was like, yo, this is so, we have to read this because I feel like it really ties everything together. Like it really shows this is important.
Yeah. And it's funny because we were talking about that, and it's from the chapter in the book and in part 2 called You Can Feed Yourself. It's the truth. And it says, I kind of do like a contrast of the world says versus the word says. And the world says, you don't need to feed yourself. Try to get by on as little as possible. And we hear that in the safe places, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. But the word says, the angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched Elijah and said, get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you. 1 Kings 19:7. Get up and eat. That's my favorite. I need to put that in my kid.
Yeah, get up and eat. I mean, I need to like have the first reminder when my alarm clock goes off, get up and eat. Oh, because the journey is too much for you. Like you have to be well nourished for what lies ahead. Yeah. The journey is too much for you. I know that an unfed believer is easy prey. This journey, life is a challenge. In this world, we will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world. And there's one verse that I think it would be really helpful to read. Romans 12:1-2. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. One way my mind can be renewed is when it's properly fed. Like this is all coming to me now. Like, I don't know why, but then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. And I'm just going to quote you. We can't make waves in this world when we're hungry. We have to be fed to be the hands and feet of Jesus and do what we were created to do.
Yeah. And I love Romans 12 too. It is literally the verse I use in chapter 1 of the book. But what's interesting is Romans 12:1 is one that diet culture loves to take out of context.
To twist.
Yeah.
Here's what's funny about that. I'm going to say this. As I was reading that, it started coming out of my mouth. Offer your bodies as living sacrifice. I was like, oh, what am I saying? Yeah. And then I'm like, no, I know what God just showed me in there for me personally, for Chrissy to comprehend, to understand, to put together. It wasn't the twisted version that I'm always hearing. It's true. It's the true, holy and pleasing, what it was meant to be.
What a sacrifice.
Yeah.
To show up and feed yourself in a world that wants you underfed so you can't be used.
Yes, there it is. The whole point of this episode. So good. Kind of describe the last time you experienced true freedom. What did it look like in your life?
I have loved living in Las Vegas because I've always been kind of an outdoorsy person. There's nothing like being in the desert and hiking in the desert. And whenever I'm hiking and I get to just see the vastness of the desert and my very fortunate ability to move about and hike in an able body at this point in my life, like that to me is why you see me out my foot pictures so much, because I'm, just such a blessing to be able to have these feet carry me to places where I feel free. I feel really close to God and nature. I don't usually worry about my food at this point in my life, but, I'm not worried about like eating my trail gummy bears or my, my peanut butter pretzels or whatever it is we have with us. It's just, and I feel like that's true for my whole family, is like, we feel truly free when we're out in nature.
That's awesome. Aw, thanks for sharing. I do like your feet pictures where your feet are crossed, and it's so pretty because you are in so many different areas and scenes, and like somehow that draws us as the viewer into that space, yet it probably doesn't even come close to what you're experiencing there.
Yeah. And, and I have friends who are not able-bodied and are very appreciative of the sharing, and I share a lot for them. They're like, I love it when you share your pictures because those are places my feet can't take me. And so there are a lot of reasons I share them, but a lot of people like to see things that maybe they wouldn't get to see otherwise. And I recognize kind of how fortunate I am to be able to do that.
So blessed. Awesome. And I have been so blessed that you were here. Leslie, thank you so much. Friends, you can find links to connect with Leslie in the show notes. You can find a link to her book, Feed Yourself, which I think we could all spend some time reading, maybe replace our binge watching Netflix or doom scrolling, things that keep us away from freedom, and dive into Feed Yourself and the scriptures that she references in that book as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Old School Food Freedom Podcast. For over 20 years, Finding Balance has been helping people walk in freedom by discovering where Jesus fits into their struggles with food and body image. If you want more biblical truth and encouragement, head on over to FINDINGbalance.com and subscribe to our free daily vitamin devotional. While you're there, explore our Christ-centered Lasting Freedom online course and small group tools. You can help keep this ministry going by donating today at FINDINGbalance.com. See you next time. The content in this podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose, treat, or prescribe a particular course of action. If you have or suspect you may have an eating disorder, please consult your healthcare provider. If you desire to receive faith-based care, visit ChristianTreatmentFinder.com to browse professionals with a Kingdom campaign against eating disorders.